The buzzwords that are floating around out there everywhere in conversations about family estrangement are driving me nuts. 3 of them in particular that I'm going to talk about today have become like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. Every time I hear them or see them come up in conversations, they immediately polarize people, set people on edge, and stir up a whole lot of unnecessary drama, confusion, and hurt. It's not because they're not relevant or applicable. In fact, it's quite the opposite. However, they're also grossly misunderstood, both in meaning and in application. The words I'm talking about are toxic, emotional abuse, and boundaries. I know you've also heard a lot of buzzwords like this too. Feel free to leave me a comment and let me know what your cringe words are, and let's talk about them. These buzzwords are getting thrown around like confetti, and let's be honest, sometimes more like hand grenades. But the misunderstandings about them and what they really mean versus how they actually apply to these kinds of situations, I believe is doing more harm than good. I want to help change that. I'm not here to judge anyone. I'm not here to point fingers or participate in blame games. Believe me, there is plenty of that to go around. I'm here to share information both from my heart and also from my head and experience, and do what I can to help other people better understand what's going on and contribute to the solution. I'm a life healing coach with extensive trauma experience and certifications. I've worked for the past 10 years primarily with women who have been deeply affected by relationship trauma of all kinds and are now trying to heal from it, piece their lives back together, and do better, especially for the next generation. Unfortunately, I've also lived every devastating detail of estrangement, and I've been hit with it by every side. I know the pain, the grief, and I also know what really causes it. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down those 3 hot button terms and sharing what these words actually mean, how they're often misused, and why getting them right could make all the difference in how you approach your family, relationships, your healing, and your peace. Let's tackle that first bristly buzzword of toxic. This one seems to set people on fire faster than any of them. I get it. Nobody wants to be called this. Nobody wants to be seen as toxic. In terms of an estrangement relationship, the word toxic correctly refers to behaviors, patterns, or dynamics used or embraced by one person that another believes are harmful, hurtful, manipulative, or emotionally damaging to them. Here's where the word becomes a trigger point. It's often misused, especially when someone labels anyone they dislike or disagree with as toxic, even if the behavior is situational or stems from misunderstandings or, quite frankly, was warranted. It's also far too often exaggerating by painting someone's whole personality or entire being as toxic based on 1 or 2 actions or friction points. Here's where this gets tricky though. There very often are toxic elements involved when a relationship breaks to the point of estrangement, and a lot of times they're happening on both sides. They aren't just one-off things though. Most likely, they've been going on for years, maybe even decades, and have probably even been passed down from previous generations. The first time or 2 they happen, it's a mistake. After that, it's a choice. It's not always one we're aware of that we're making either. This stuff is sinister, and it likes to hide in family lines. It's the normal, and in many cases, it's the only way of functioning some people have ever known or had modeled for them. They literally don't know how to be any different or any other way. The real harm from this kind of a dynamic comes when the person who's doing it isn't willing to listen or attempt to change it, despite the other person bringing it to the surface or calling it out as hurtful or inappropriate. Rather than listening, empathizing, or trying to fix things, the one who brought it up was met with excuses, justification, and defensiveness. They're often informed that they are the ones that are out of line, and this is just how families are, and they need to deal with it and get over it. And what may have been bad behavior at one point does truly become toxic when it's repeated over and over again, and there's more effort made to avoid dealing with it or taking responsibility for it than there is for the person on the receiving end of it. This is also the point where people start walking on eggshells around each other. They shut down, they create distance, and when they lose all hope that they'll ever be heard or that anything will ever change in this relationship, they tend to walk away as a final act of self-preservation. Now let's tackle buzzword number 2, emotional abuse. Again, this is another hot button for a lot of people. No one wants to admit to it. No one wants to be part of it. But it happens a lot more often than people realize, simply because they don't know what it is and they don't know that they're doing it. By definition, emotional abuse is a repeated pattern of behaviors that harm another individual's emotional, psychological, or spiritual well-being. This type of behavior has become so prevalent and so normalized in our society that people who, quote, can't handle it have even earned their own new age nicknames. Snowflakes, Karens, pansies, that kind of a thing. No matter what we call them, though, nothing changes the very real impact it has on those on the receiving end of it. I want to be real for a minute about what really constitutes emotional abuse. It includes things like lying, cheating, screaming, manipulation, gaslighting, changing the details of a situation to make yourself look good, deflection, criticism, bullying, smear campaigns, retaliation, name-calling, silent treatments, and ghosting. And since I know that most of the people who watch my videos are estranged parents, I'm going to interrupt this one right here, because I can hear y'all saying, well, my kid is the one abusing me because they ghosted me. They probably didn't. Ghosting is when somebody suddenly withdraws from a relationship without any warning, explanation, accountability, or further communication. They just simply disappear, or they play mind games until you do. It happens when a friend suddenly disappears or stops responding, or you get stood up for a date, or given a fake phone number. I've also had it happen with a therapist who was supposed to be helping and treating my son, but started canceling appointments with more frequency, and then made excuses why they couldn't fit us into their schedule for any future appointments. If you believe your now adult child did this to you, it probably wasn't sudden. There were probably many attempts over many years to communicate and to resolve the issues that were either shut down or minimized, and there was probably a final straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, or a final incident in which they realized that things were hopeless and they were done. That's the difference between estrangement and ghosting. Now, I realize that's a pretty extensive list that I gave, and I honestly don't know anyone who hasn't done at least some of those things from time to time, especially in moments of exhaustion, frustration, or anger. But they are what they are, and they do still leave a mark, even when they're unintentional, accidental, or happen amidst a temporary loss of control. They become truly abusive when they're deliberate, frequently repeated, or become a default method of response, and especially if at any time they lack accountability or remorse. If hearing that still makes your blood boil and you're still thinking you're fine and it's not that bad and they just need to get over it or deal with it, I want you to please consider carefully what you're asking them to do. You are literally asking them to stand there and let themselves be abused so you don't have to take accountability. Those words, emotional abuse, share many of the same problems that toxic has. They're trigger words that are often misused and hyperbolized, especially when we're referring to occasional disagreements or harsh words, or we're deeming that every negative interaction, correction, direction, or no will be abusive. If some of these behaviors happen to be on our part, we do still have a responsibility to do what we can to fix the damage that they cause. But occasional disagreements, anger, or harsh words usually don't cross the line of abuse. The times when this kind of behavior does cause the most problems is when people fail to correct it, or accept responsibility for it, or recognize it as actual abuse because it doesn't involve physical harm. Rest assured that the long-term damage that emotional abuse has is just as real and just as powerful as any other kind of abuse. And continuing to engage in this kind of stuff or trying to justify it is usually what gets someone designated as toxic. The last buzzword I want to talk about today is boundaries. That's such a beautiful, lovely word, isn't it? Actually, it really is. When they're used appropriately, boundaries truly are good things that benefit everyone. They are friends, they are not foes. Boundaries are personal rules or limits set by a person to protect their own emotional, physical, or mental well-being. They aren't unfair. They're not about cutting people off just because they don't like somebody, or who don't do what they want them to do, or even who disagree with them. Boundaries define where one person ends and where another begins, and they put parameters around what is and isn't acceptable in terms of how we interact with each other. You might not like those boundaries, but it is still your job to respect them, because boundaries aren't about other people. They're about ourselves. They exist to keep us safe. They're about what does and doesn't feel comfortable to us and what we will and won't tolerate. And they also define what part of the situation is mine and what part of it is yours. If someone has already outwardly put boundaries in place with you, it's because they felt they were necessary in order to protect themselves, their own personal space, or their right to live their life however they want. And their boundaries are their way of telling you where you're welcome and where you're not. Here's a little secret. Boundaries usually start out fairly small, but they get bigger and stronger if they're not respected. If it feels like someone is trying to push you away and they're trying harder and harder to push you away, it's likely because you're not respecting the boundaries and you keep pushing against them and trying to bulldoze through them rather than honor them. This especially shows up in situations where grandkids are involved. Your adult kids didn't take your grandkids away from you. I promise they did not. They didn't push you away to hurt you. If a situation is such that your adult child and their children are now on one side of a boundary and you're on the other, it means the situation has deteriorated to the point that they don't trust you to be around their children. It's usually meant to be a wake-up call, not a weapon. Here's another secret. Boundaries are not walls, nor are they ultimatums. They have doors. And if you want those doors to open, you simply have to do what the person who set those boundaries requires. It's quite amazing how little is often required to unlock those doors, but it's astounding how few people will actually do it. Boundaries themselves aren't the problem. In fact, it's the lack of boundaries or the disregard for boundaries that cause the most problems, because that's when people get hurt. Boundaries aren't selfish. They aren't a punishment. They're a safety net for you, for them, and for everyone else involved, including the grandkids. So what do you do if you've gotten this far in my video and realize, okay, maybe there's stuff I need to work on? Well, first of all, give yourself some grace. We've all been there. We're all human. We all make mistakes. That doesn't mean you get a free pass or that you get to make excuses for it. But please do consider it as an invitation to clean things up, fix what you can, and do better because you now know better. I can't promise you that your currently estranged relationships can be fixed. I don't think anybody can promise that. It's a complex dynamic in which both parties have to be ready and both parties have to be contributing to the solution, and both have to do their own internal healing work themselves before they can create a safe situation to come back together. Until that happens, do the work on yourself. Let others do theirs however they see fit. Keep loving them from a distance and choose peace and happiness for yourself. If you'd like some support in making that happen, let me know. I'd be happy to help. This is what I do. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.